It's why dieting is so hard. It's why saving is so hard. It's why
Yes.
exercising is so hard.
Yes.
Because when we think about ourselves in the future, the part of our brain that fires off is the same part of our brain that we use when we think about strangers.
You are listening to the Why Smart Women podcast, the podcast that helps smart women work out why we repeatedly make the wrong decisions and how to make better ones. From relationships, career choices, finances, to faux fur jackets and kale smoothies. Every moment of every day, we're making decisions. Let's make them good ones. I'm your host, Annie McCubbin, and as a woman of a certain age, I've made my own share of really bad decisions. Not my husband. I don't mean him, though. I did go through some shockers to find him. And I wish this podcast had been around to save me from myself. This podcast will give you insights into the working of your own brain, which will blow your mind. I acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I'm recording, and you are listening on this day. Always was, always will be, Aboriginal land. So, hello everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Why Smart Women. So this week I'm going to be interviewing Pascal Helya-Moray, and we're going to be talking about superannuation. Now, before you hit the pause button or just decide that you're not going to listen to this week's episode, stick with it. Please stick with it, because I've read her book, which is called Rich Woman, Poor Woman, and I fell into a deep well of despondency and had to lay down under the doona for quite a long time to recover from it. And I would like to save my listeners from this fate. So stay tuned and listen, because actually we all need to understand superannuation. So hello, Pascal.
Hello, Annie. Thank you for having me.
My absolute pleasure. Your name, Pascal Helya-Moray, really does, I don't know, seem like somebody who's more going to write a book on Italian Renaissance art or something, doesn't it?
That's the next one. Yeah.
That's okay, so they're sort of similar, aren't they? And yet you decided to write a book on women.
Yes.
And superannuation.
I know.
Why did you do this?
Oh, because I was looking for a cure for insomnia. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Because I think that we have 1 in 6 women who retires into poverty in Australia. 1 in 6. And God help you if you're single, because that number becomes 1 in 3.
Those stats are just mind-bogglingly awful.
Yes, they're mind-boggling because it's such a high ratio, 1 in 3. But also, how do we, as a population, how do we not know these numbers?
Yeah, why? I guess it's that notion, isn't it? I think because we do know that the highest proportion of homelessness is in middle-aged women, correct?
Yes, that's right. That's right.
And so is it something to do with the fact that middle-aged women, everybody, all listeners, please excuse any noise in the background because we have 3 dogs here today and they're having a lovely time. So is it because middle-aged women and their concerns and their outcomes are invisible to us as a society? I mean, why? What's going on? It's terrible.
So the reason that the older Australian woman is at the point end of business, shall we say, when it comes to superannuation, is because superannuation was introduced in 1992
by Keating.
Mm-hmm. And so here we are 30 years on, or a little more, but at the time that woman was probably in the workforce.
The one that's homeless now.
Mm-hmm. She left the workforce to have children.
Yeah.
She had heard about this thing called superannuation being introduced, perhaps, but she hadn't accrued any, or she hadn't accrued much before she left the workforce.
Yeah.
She's stepped out to have children. Hubby has said, "Don't worry about your super.
Yeah.
I'm going to look after you."
Yeah.
And everything
then married
is fine
his secretary, right?
Until it isn't. That's right.
Yeah.
And so in the marital breakdown, which is likely acrimonious.
Yep.
She has nothing to fall back on. So he's walked away with a super balance, And maybe she's walked away with the house.
Maybe.
But the house doesn't pay the bills. And
No, the house does not.
No.
It's not liquid.
And she hasn't been given the opportunity at all to provision for her retirement.
So this has happened. A friend of mine's friend, who was a teacher.
Yes.
And she's in her early 60s.
Yes.
3 children. And she exactly fits that narrative. She's now living in a car.
Right.
She had a perfectly reasonable middle-class life.
Yes.
And now at 60, after all that, raising children, taking time out from her career, exactly, I think that's what's happened. She's now living in a car, and it's devastating for her. And this is what you're saying. It's how we get into these awful, invidious situations that we can't get out of, right?
Well, exactly. And, I mean, had you rewound 30 years ago and said, this is, and projected and shown her future, she would have said, no way, Jose. This is just not going to happen to me. But because of a number of systemic deficiencies, so we have, and particularly for women, when it comes to their superannuation, there are 3 key reasons why women retire, even in the best of outcomes, so putting aside any marital issues or whatever, but even in the best of situations, women retire with anything like, a third to a half less than men because of 3 key factors. Number 1, the gender pay gap.
Which is at what now, 17% last time I looked?
Yes, but if you factor in, bonuses, overtime, etc., that number's actually closer to 23%. Then the second...
Whoa.
I know.
Really?
I know.
That's nearly a quarter.
I know.
Oh, my God. That just makes me want to scream. Go on.
The second reason is because of time out of the workforce.
Yeah.
Right? So your friend's friend, she would have stepped out of the workforce 3 times to have 3 children.
Okay, yeah.
Yes. So during those, let's say she was out for 2, maybe 3 years per child.
Yeah.
Well, that's 6 or 9 years in which she was not being paid super because she was not earning an income.
Right.
And she was not being paid superannuation. So she has either, a 6-year or a 9-year deficiency in her superannuation
which her
accumulation.
husband doesn't have.
Right, because he worked all the way through. That's right. And was earning at a man's rates.
So what about paternity leave now? Is that going to address that to some degree?
Indeed, but if I can just quickly touch on the third systemic deficiency,
do.
which is the type of work that women do. Now, what I mean by this is that if you think about the 7 million women in Australia who are aged between 18 and 65, so that superannuation accumulation phase of their lives, 40% of them are not in the paid workforce, which is a huge number. And then if you think of the remaining 40% are not
at any given time.
At any given time are not in the paid workforce. And then of the
You're killing me with these stats,
I'm
Pascal.
sorry. Do I need to prop you up?
You actually do. It's Tuesday and I don't drink on a Tuesday, but I certainly feel like having a glass
I know.
of wine.
It's
You're ruining my routine.
I'm harshing a buzz. And of the 60% of women in that age group who are in the workforce, guess what? Most are working part-time.
Because of the children issue.
Correct, because they have domestic responsibilities and work. So all of these factors combined, gender pay gap, time out of the workforce when you're not earning superannuation, and working part-time where you earn super fractionally, if you're working at all, these are the reasons why women end up with anywhere between a third to a half as much super as a man their age.
So it's so systemic, isn't it?
It is absolutely systemic. And so now jumping back to your question around superannuation now being paid on parental leave, yes, this is one of the new measures introduced by the current government. And I say hip, hip, hooray, because, it's these sorts of measures that are actually going to help plug the gender super gap.
It's just devastating, isn't it?
Yeah. So
so hidden,
absolutely. But also, what's fascinating is that the homeless women are also hidden.
Totally.
And homelessness for women for older women is not experienced in the same way that it is for men.
Can you unpack that for me?
So if we think of homeless people, we typically
On the street, Pitt Street Mall.
Right, Pitt Street Mall or on William Street.
With a thing
going
and a
to the
sign.
Exactly, help me, blah,
Help
blah,
me,
blah.
yeah.
And they're typically male.
Oh, yeah.
But we rarely see homeless women looking like that. And that's because homelessness for them presents differently. They don't want to be so exposed. I mean, there's a security issue. There's a safety issue.
100%.
Right?
They're much more vulnerable, are they not?
Exactly. So the homeless women, they tend to either be permanently couch surfing or living in a van or, just constantly staying with friends. So it's a lot more, there's a pride around it.
Yeah, of course.
And also safety, because they understand how vulnerable they are physically and they don't want any trouble.
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking that you would imagine that one's children would intervene in this process, but of course one's children, I have two children, 27, 31, they're still around, they're very nice human beings, but they go away, right? I mean, they have their own lives. They
right.
go to New York and get a job or do something. Or
That's right. And as the parent, you don't want to be the one
You
cramping
don't-
their
no.
style or being a burden or
no,
whatever it might be.
Of course you don't, do you? How embarrassing.
Yes.
It makes me feel embarrassed thinking about it, that I would
know.
be in that. Excuse me for a second. Harry, can you just make sure that Ryder isn't haranguing Dusty? Dusty's adorable, listeners. If you could see Dusty, you'd think that Ryder, my big Groodle, was a big bully. He's a bit of a bully, isn't he? A bit snappish.
He's quite large, Ryder.
He's over 30 kilos. Yeah, he is large. We're moving into an apartment and I'm just really hoping that,
Where are you going to put him?
I don't know, in the closet.
Okay.
Just sedate him.
On the bike rack.
Oh, no, downstairs in the car park. I don't know, I'm not sure.
He can be the apartment block guard dog.
Yeah, he'd be really good
He'd
at
be
that.
great at that.
He'd
I think
be
we've just
great.
found him a job.
A job
Yeah.
for him,
Yeah.
and he won't end up homeless, so that's good. So this notion of, I guess there's also big cognitive biases in our structural societal approach to it, and also in our brains to the degree to which we consider our futures. Would you agree with that as well?
Absolutely. Because none of us would ever imagine we would end up that way.
Not in a million years,
And-
right?
And none of us, particularly if we're women, and we know that we're, I use the word in inverted commas, expected to look after, family members.
Well, we're
and so on and so
socialised
on.
in that direction, are we not?
Exactly. None of us would think that after a lifetime spent caring for others, that our thanks would be shown in the form of homelessness. And there's also, I think, a very
So
much
sad.
a very
God.
tangible sense of, like, why hasn't somebody fixed this? Right?
Well, yeah, because it's not well, it's hidden, and you
Yes.
can't fix something that's not,
That's right. Exactly right.
in evidence, can you?
That's right. So it's a perfectly wicked problem, is how I like to think of it.
Yeah, it really is. And I know for myself that me thinking about myself in the future has always just been a big missing part of my brain. I'm an actor by trade, and there is a certain immediacy, I think.
Yes. Well, you're being told to live in the here and now, and
100%.
yeah, exactly.
In that creative process,
Yep.
it's very immediate, and I think most actors are sort of used to that hand-to-mouth existence, and I certainly was in that until my 40s, and I think to some degree that infiltrated my thinking about myself in the future. But I do know that there's a big cognitive bias in that when we think about ourselves in the future, which is why dieting is so hard, it's why saving is so hard, it's why
Yes.
exercising is so hard.
Yes.
Because when we think about ourselves in the future, the part of our brain that fires off is the same part of our brain that we use when we think about strangers.
Oh.
So it's almost like
Stranger danger.
strange. That's right.
no.
I'm like, well, I'd really like to eat, that biscuit. And then your brain goes, well, do it. because it doesn't matter because it's not you anyway.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's
it's going to
right.
be somebody else's problem tomorrow.
Yes.
And then you wake up, that's not true. It
Yes.
was actually
No,
your
it
problem.
was your problem, and it remains your problem.
Remains your problem. So that's why, and people go, well, you know, you've got to use willpower when it comes to saving. You've got to use willpower when it comes to diet. You've got to use willpower when it comes to exercise. And we know that willpower is a terrible master.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's the only thing that helps us is building in habits. And
Exactly.
external habits like
That's
super
right.
are just immensely helpful.
Exactly. And as you would read in the book, you know, creating habits, and particularly my favorite, automatic habits,
Yeah,
where
100%.
you don't have to think, you don't have to decide, oh, what am I going to do with this spare $100 or whatever. Just take the choice away from yourself, because left to your own devices,
Yeah.
you will not make
Present
the right,
you, the present
will not make the
focus.
right
Yeah,
choice.
yeah.
But if you have mechanisms in place, and I've outlined them in the book,
Yep,
on
you
how you can produce set and forget strategies, and remove the temptation to spend money rather than tip it into your super, then you're setting yourself up for super success.
Because super is compounding.
Exactly.
Can you explain what that is, please?
Compounding is where the interest, let's say you have $100 and the interest is 10%. So after 1 year, you have $110.
Yeah.
Now, that will grow by 10% the next year, let's say. So that's all of a sudden we're now at $121. So
got it right.
the point is that it's growing by itself.
You don't have to
You're
think
not-
about it.
that's
don't
right.
have to go down to the bank. You don't have to do a deposit.
Exactly. And
It takes the choice away from your brain.
correct. But it's also, in the long run, you know, that compound interest is this incredibly magnifying effect. Einstein called it the eighth wonder of the world, and he wasn't wrong. It's how your $1, your $5, your $10 here can become worth so much more in the long run, without you having to take extra action to get it there.
Yeah.
Of course, in my book, I advocate, you know, add all the money to your super you can, but the effect of compound interest and just having that $100 become the 110, become the 121, et cetera,
Yeah.
over a period of
20,
5,
30
10,
years.
15, 20, 25, 30 years
Yeah.
is absolutely incredible. And I encourage everyone and all of the listeners to jump onto the Money Smart website.
Money Smart website. We'll put this in the show notes,
Yes,
everybody.
please. .gov.au, and just play with the compound interest calculator, because it is a real eye-opener.
Will it be inspiring?
It is inspiring, and all of a sudden, you can see that the $50 per week you're putting into your super or whatever it may be, all of a sudden has this magnificent ballooning effect.
Wow.
on the end balance.
Wow.
And that is, it almost becomes like a game. It's like, oh, well, what if I put in $75 a week? What if I put in $100 a week? And you can just see the impacts in the long run.
See, now I have read your book, and then I had to lay down for a number of hours with a cool cloth on my head, just to get over the shock of my misspent 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
I did say to myself at that point, it may be a little bit late for me, but it is not too late for the generation coming after us.
No.
And I would really like to be part of the messaging around you have to take this seriously and this could save your life, because it actually could.
Yes.
Because none of us, as we said at the beginning of this, can see ourselves in the future accurately.
No.
We cannot imagine a future where we're not sitting pretty.
Exactly. And I think what, and I know we've spoken about this previously, and you said to me that your attitude or your cognitive dissonance regarding your super was that it's forced, and that is so completely, the antithesis of how you are in your career and as an actor. And
yeah, that's right.
And then we had a lovely mic drop moment where I said, but Annie, super and having a super strong balance, it gives you choice.
Yeah.
And that was a bit of a moment, wasn't
Yeah,
it?
it was a
Yes.
bit of a moment because it is true, we do have cognitive dissonance. And I think there is that thing about don't tell me what to do.
Absolutely.
I don't want to be told what to do. I want to live my life the way I want to live it.
On my terms.
On my terms. Well,
That's
if I
right.
want to live my life the way I want to live my life, then I need financial freedom to do that.
Right.
And the notion that, money doesn't make you happy, well, no, it doesn't. But having none certainly makes you very,
deeply unhappy.
very unhappy.
Exactly.
It is a terrible situation to be in.
Exactly.
And I do want freedom. I do want the freedom to do what I want, to go on a trip, to buy what I want.
Right.
To
Yeah.
live. As I said, we've just sold and downsized to an apartment, and so, which is awesome. And I'll now be 800 metres from the beach, and I'm sort of looking at this future where I can sort of do what I want. But I
Yes.
won't be able to do what I want if I'm not financially secure.
No,
Right?
exactly. Yeah. And I think people, and maybe, I'm not sure if women more so than men, but people generally have this idea that super is this thing separate to them. They've siloed it. It is something that is divorced from their everyday life. But actually, nothing could be further from the
No,
truth.
clearly not. It's
And
integral.
It's integral. And every time, like you think about when you start a new job, or maybe you finish a job, or there's birth of a new child, or there's a marriage, or divorce, or selling a home. All of these things interact with your super in some way, shape, or form. And so I think as a nation, we need to start understanding that superannuation is not a monster. Superannuation needs to be our best friend.
100%. It needs the biggest reframe
Absolutely.
from where it is at the moment.
I know.
And that book did that for me.
Awesome.
It forced me into a reframe, because we have very, very intuitive responses to things that make us uncomfortable.
That's right.
And women especially are sold the message that your intuition can be trusted. You can feel it in your waters. Now, I feel all sorts of things in my waters. I have all sorts of intuitive responses to things, and they're dead wrong. And it was only when I began investigating critical thinking that I realised that idea of the intuition is king is not right.
Correct.
Because my intuition around superannuation is 100% wrong. So if I had listened to that,
Yeah.
then I'd be in a worse position than I'm in now. And I think for all the women out there that do consider themselves smart, do watch your intuitive response to this notion of being forced into super, because it can actually provide you with this astonishing future. And if you ignore it and don't nurture it, then it just won't, right?
Well, how can it? You've not given it a chance. Yeah. So it is about nurturing your super, and also I think there's a reticence amongst people to contribute extra to their super, right? But as women, we are behind the 8 ball from the word
Anyway.
go,
Yeah,
right? Because
yeah.
of those systemic deficiencies I was talking about earlier. So, ladies, just add as much as you can to your super.
Do it, ladies, do it.
Because guess what? There is no downside. There is
100%.
no downside.
Yeah.
And I have too much super, said no one ever.
No one ever in the whole world
No one ever
has said that.
So really better, the system was not designed for us. We need to work hard
Yep.
to overcome those systemic deficiencies.
Yep.
Because I, for one, do not want to see you, homeless in some years' time.
No, I don't want that. I don't think I'd like that very much.
No.
I tell you the problem I've currently got, which is sort of relevant, is that we are out in the sticks here in Allambie Heights.
Mm-hmm.
And so David and I will have a bottle of wine at night between us, and then we'd like one more glass. But to get that glass of wine, we'd have to get in the car and drive up to the bottle shop. Or
Yes.
sometimes I want chocolate, right?
Yes.
I want that anyway.
Yeah.
Now, we're moving into an apartment that is literally above the bottle shop
Oh dear.
and above Woolies.
Okay.
And it brings this back to this notion of will and availability to spending. It's
That's
sort of the
right.
same thing.
Yes.
Because I said to him last night, I had quite a long and boring discussion. He was like, "Oh my God, we've already bought it. Can you stop banging on about Woolworths and the bottle shop?" But the availability of
Yes.
wine,
Yes.
and I know what's going to happen is that we will have to utilise our willpower,
yes.
right?
Yes.
Because at the moment there's an intervention. We
Yes.
have, right?
It's an interrupted journey.
Right,
Pardon
but
the
now
pun.
it's not so. It's
Right,
that's exactly
sorry.
right. So in a way, it is sort of like super, isn't it? Don't you think?
Yes.
Because at the moment,
Yes.
it's like there is something between me and spending,
Correct.
right? And
You
that is the
can't
car
interfere.
journey,
You can't
right?
interfere with
Yeah.
its progress. But
Yeah.
now you are going to be able to.
Yes, but now I
interfere.
can spend. With
Yes.
great ease. I can go down there and it will. I don't want to be drinking all the time and I don't want to be eating chocolate and possibly Tim Tams. I don't want that. But it's just exactly the same principle, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So what are your strategies going to be?
Yeah.
I think you have to come up with some strategies
Around
for
not.
distracting yourself.
Yes.
So when you start thinking about the bottle of wine, maybe that's your cue to go for a walk.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Or the Tim Tams are calling and you're like, oh, I'm going to run a bath.
Yeah.
Anything to stop that
Intervene
journey.
in the cognitive
Correct.
process.
Correct.
Because we know that desiring things like spending money,
That's right.
like having some chocolate or something that maybe you shouldn't have every night of the week, or drinking more wine is in the emotional part of the brain.
Exactly.
So we have to use the prefrontal cortex to intervene in that.
That's right. The good old executive decision-making
Executive,
centre.
that's right. So that is the strategy that I'm going to employ, because David and I both trained in acceptance commitment therapy.
Right.
And what they do was that you don't argue with the voice that you don't like. You just accept it. So put it on a
Aha.
leaf, send it down the stream,
Yes.
put that thought on a leaf, send it away, do something that's aligned with your values. Right? So
yes.
otherwise you get into this limbic system battle where I want a Tim Tam. You shouldn't have a Tim Tam, but I really want one. Why shouldn't I? Went to the gym this morning and now I'm really tired and I'd like a bit of chocolate and it's just downstairs. Right, that arguing.
That is exactly what happens in my brain.
I know.
You have just articulated
Right.
my chocolate.
Right.
Internal chocolate.
Yeah, I've
chocolate
been to the
arguments.
gym.
Yep.
I'm tired. Why
Yep,
shouldn't
just
I?
had a big day at work.
Big day.
Yes.
Exhausted. Why
Yep.
shouldn't I have some sugar?
Yep.
Right?
Yeah. Or the kids are
Exactly.
eating them. Yep.
Why
That's
shouldn't
right.
I have it?
Yeah.
And I don't mean to say, women that are listening, that we are not to ever eat chocolate or sugar.
No,
I'm
not
just
at all.
talking about as a nightly occurrence. It's probably not ideal.
No. No, exactly. Or if it's the fifth sugary thing you've had that
day.
that's probably
yeah.
on the high side.
Yeah, that is
Yeah.
probably unnecessary. But that notion of, rather than arguing with that part of your brain,
Mm-hmm.
because the notion is that probably it's going to win if you're involved in a battle with the limbic system, with the
Right.
emotional part of the brain.
Right.
Whereas if you just go, there's that
acknowledge it.
thought, acknowledge the thought, send it, I put
its
it,
way.
I send it on its way, I have it.
Yes.
Almost incorporated into my being, because it's just a thought, hasn't got
Yes.
any power.
Yes.
And then out of your value system or the way you want to live your life, do something.
Yes.
And that's the action part, which is, as you say, go for a walk,
have a bath.
have a bath,
Phone a friend.
phone a friend.
Yes.
Yep. Can I phone you, Pascal?
Anytime, Annie.
Is that
Anytime.
all right?
Of course.
Because Woolies is open.
I
I think really late.
Yeah, and okay, but Annie, what do I say on the phone to you if I hear
Yeah.
the cashier say that's
Yeah.
$9.95?
Yeah.
Thanks.
I could probably lie to you at
Yeah.
that point.
Oh no, I'm not at Woolies. I'm I'm at Baker's Delight.
Yeah, that's
But Annie, it's
Annie,
7:30 at night.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I am pretty good. I am actually a pretty good actor. I'm pretty good at lying. I'm quite quick on my feet. So you've got to really watch out for that.
Okay.
I need to phone you early in the process.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. Before you get to 7:30.
Before I've got into the lift.
Yes.
It's only 2 floors down.
Oh wow.
I
Okay.
know. It's quite bad, isn't it? It's quite
Yes.
a bad outcome. It's also
I mean, perfect in so many ways.
perfect
but
in and a wine bar just around the corner. And anyway, it's going to be great. So back to this notion, is there anything else we need to say about superannuation? Or do you think, because I really want to make a difference in this space, because I think it could be saving women a lot of future pain.
Yes. I think the most dangerous gap, really, of the gender pay gap and the gender super gap is the knowledge gap. We touched on this earlier. It's the fact that so many people, and women particularly, are not aware of it. So my counsel, I suppose, would be to any listener who reads the book, would be to tell your girlfriends, to tell your sister, tell your cousin, your whoever, tell your masseuse. I really don't care, but tell them what you've learned through the book, just to raise awareness of the issue. Yeah, absolutely.
So all the women out there that are listening, we have to lift each other up. This is what it is to be a female in 2024, especially after the absolute disaster that happened in America last week, which you're not going to go into because we'll all fall into it.
Sad.
We're all very sad and very depressed about it. Read the book. Listen to this podcast. Read the book. Investigate your super and tell your friends, because come 30 years, trust me, you do not know what your future will bring. None of us do. So let's do each other a favour. Let's bring superannuation out of the darkness and into the light and make it sexy. Like a Tim Tam.
Sister.
Okay.
I love that.
Sexy is a Tim Tam. Because you were talking about broccoli in the
I
book,
know,
weren't you?
I know.
You should have talked to me first, honestly. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Pascal. I think that was really instructive. And we're on a mission now,
We
right?
are. We are on
Critical
a
thinking and superannuation.
And call me anytime.
I will. I will. So thank you so much, listeners, for tuning in. Lovely to have you along. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. See you next week. Bye.
Thanks for tuning in to Why Smart Women with me, Annie McCubbin. I hope today's episode has ignited your curiosity and left you feeling inspired by my anti-motivational style. Join me next time as we continue to unravel the fascinating layers of our brains and develop ways to sort out the fact from the fiction and the over 6,000 thoughts we have in the course of every day. Remember, intelligence isn't enough. You can be as smart as paint, but it's not just about what you know, it's about how you think. And in all this talk of whether or not you can trust your gut, if you ever feel unsafe, whether it's in the street, at work, car park, in a bar, or in your own home, please respect that gut feeling. Staying safe needs to be our primary objective. We can build better lives, but we have to stay safe to do that. And don't forget to subscribe, rate and review the podcast and share it with your fellow smart women and allies. Together, we're hopefully reshaping the narrative around women and making better decisions. So until next time, stay sharp, stay savvy, and keep your critical thinking hat shiny. This is Annie McCubbin signing off from Why Smart Women. See you later. This episode was produced by Harrison Hess. It was executive produced and written by me, Annie McCubbin.